have to take care of this truck because this truck takes care of me. And it's a partnership, and that's why.
They drove trucks across ice thin enough to swallow a rig hole, hauling freight through blizzards and 40 below wind chill for the cameras. But it turns out the most dangerous parts of some of their lives happened after the cameras stopped rolling. One of them never made it home from a trucking event. One of them nearly burned his own apartment building down. One of them walked away from a head-on crash that killed 2 strangers, then went right back to the ice years later. By the time we get through this list, you'll understand why so many fans say the real story of ice road truckers was never really about the ice at all. Let's start with the one loss that hit this show hardest. Darrell Ward joined Ice Road Truckers in its 6th season and instantly became one of its most magnetic personalities. A Montana native who'd grown up around trucks on his family's harvest rigs and brought a mix of charm, skill, and fearlessness that made him an audience favorite. He drove for 5 seasons, developing a reputation as someone who looked out for rookies and treated the ice with the kind of respect that comes from decades behind the wheel. On August 28, 2016, Ward had just wrapped up several days of meeting fans at the Great American Trucking Show in Dallas. He boarded a small Cessna 182 Skylane as a passenger, piloted by 56-year-old Mark Malotz, heading back toward Missoula, Montana. According to a witness who spoke with federal investigators, the aircraft looked stable on its final approach until it suddenly banked sharply and crashed into a stand of trees before coming to rest near Interstate 90. Where fire consumed much of the plane. Both Ward and Malotz died at the scene. Investigators spent nearly a year examining the wreckage and ultimately found no mechanical failure that would explain what happened. The report concluded the cause of that final, fatal turn could not be determined. Ward was 52 years old, and according to those close to him, he'd been preparing to start a new project about recovering old plane wrecks, a grim irony that wasn't lost on anyone who followed the story. He never appeared on the show again after that season, and when Ice Road Truckers eventually returned to the air years later, his absence was one of the first things longtime fans noticed. Next is a story that swaps ice for fire, literally. Art Burke spent 5 seasons on Ice Road Truckers, joining in season 7 and quickly becoming known for a big personality that made even the scariest crossings feel entertaining rather than terrifying. He drove for companies like Polar Industries during some of the show's later years, building a loyal fan base with his humor and his willingness to push through conditions that would make most people turn around. But it was an incident off camera, well after the show had wrapped, that changed the course of his life. In November 2018, Burke was attempting to produce a cannabis concentrate known as shatter inside the bathroom of his apartment in Yellowknife. The process requires large amounts of butane, a gas that's extremely flammable in enclosed spaces, and something went wrong. The butane ignited in a powerful explosion that blew the bathroom door off its hinges, damaged the ceiling, and rattled the entire building. The blast caused more than $60,000 in damage to a housing complex that mostly served lower-income residents, and Burke himself suffered burns across roughly 40% of his body, landing him in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks. It took almost 2 years for the case to work its way through court. In 2020, Burke pleaded guilty to the rare charge of arson by negligence. At his sentencing hearing, he was late to appear by video, which visibly frustrated the judge before the hearing was rescheduled. He was ultimately sentenced to 18 months of house arrest and ordered to pay tens of thousands of dollars in restitution. Because of his job, the court allowed him to serve part of that sentence from inside the cab of his own truck, which let him keep working while paying off what he owed. Interestingly, Burke's name has continued to show up in connection with the franchise, including credits tied to the show's most recent season, a reminder that even after a headline-making legal case, some of these drivers never fully leave the world of ice trucking behind. Then there's Hugh Rowland, known to fans as the Polar Bear, one of the original stars from the very first season back in 2007. Rowland's gravelly voice and blunt, no-nonsense attitude made him a fan favorite for years, second in screen time only to Alex Debogorski during the show's early run. He had a reputation for treating the cameras almost as an afterthought, famously telling producers he didn't care where they put their equipment, as long as it didn't slow him down. That attitude, combined with genuine trucking skill, made him one of the most respected drivers on the ice. Then, in 2014, everything changed. Rowland was riding as a passenger in a vehicle driven by one of the show's producers, Will Morrison, when the vehicle reportedly lost control, veered off the road, and crashed into a stand of trees. Rowland suffered serious injuries, and according to a lawsuit he later filed, those injuries were severe enough to end his trucking career and put significant strain on his marriage. The suit claimed Morrison had been driving recklessly and sought damages not just for Rowland's physical injuries, but for the toll the accident took on his personal life. There's no public record indicating the lawsuit was ever resolved publicly, and Rowland never returned to the show after that season. He's occasionally been spotted at truck shows since, signing autographs for longtime fans. And by most accounts, he's since built a life around a construction business. But the accident effectively closed the book on his time on the ice for good. Now here's a name most casual viewers won't recognize, but industry fans absolutely will. Mark Kohakewicz runs Polar Industries, the Winnipeg-based trucking company responsible for some of the most demanding hauls in the show's history. Unlike the drivers, who got the dramatic close-ups, Kohakewicz operated mostly behind the scenes, overseeing logistics for a business that supplies remote communities across Canada's north, places that depend entirely on ice roads for months out of the year. His interest in the region reportedly started as a university student, when ice fishing trips into increasingly remote territory turned into an idea for a hauling business. What began as a handful of loads in the company's first year eventually grew into hundreds of runs annually, servicing First Nations communities that have no other way to receive supplies during the winter months. One of his most notable moments came in 2017, when the rail line to Churchill, Manitoba washed out, cutting the town off from essential deliveries. Kohakewicz's crews built and operated an emergency ice road to get fuel and food to residents before the holidays, working brutally long shifts under extreme conditions to pull it off. Since the show first aired, Kohakewicz hasn't been connected to any of the dramatic personal headlines that have followed some of his fellow cast members. No arrests, no fatal accidents, no lawsuits. His story is really about the unglamorous, high-stakes logistics work that keeps the entire ice road economy running, even when nobody's pointing a camera at him. Todd Dewey's story is one of the most sobering on this list, mostly because of how close it hits to what these drivers actually risk every single day just by being on the road. Dewey joined the cast in Season 7 and quickly built a reputation as one of the fastest, most technically skilled drivers when it came to chaining up rigs for icy terrain. He wasn't the loudest personality on the show, but his competence spoke for itself. In January 2019, while hauling a load of logs near Shelton, Washington, Dewey was driving southbound when a sedan traveling the opposite direction crossed the center line and collided head-on with his truck. Both people in that car, a 65-year-old man and his 64-year-old passenger, were killed instantly. Dewey walked away physically unharmed, and investigators later determined the crash was caused by the other driver crossing into his lane, with no evidence that drugs, alcohol, or excessive speed on Dewey's part played any role. Still, surviving a fatal crash like that leaves a mark that has nothing to do with fault. Dewey posted publicly afterward, thanking people for their support and urging others to drive carefully. And by most accounts, he pulled back from long-haul routes for a while afterward. What makes his story worth revisiting now is that in 2025, after roughly 8 years away, Dewey returned to Ice Road Truckers for its 12th season, working alongside a new company called Muskie Creek. According to interviews around the relaunch, Dewey had spent the years off the show settling into family life, watching his kids finish college and becoming a grandfather, and the return to trucking was partly about building up savings for his own rig. Whatever pulled him back, it's a reminder that for some of these drivers, the appeal of the ice never really fades, even after living through something as heavy as that crash. Lisa Kelly might be the most recognizable name to come out of this entire show, and for good reason. She joined during Season 3 as the only woman on the roster at the time, hauling oversized loads across some of Alaska's most dangerous stretches of highway, including the Dalton Highway, while regularly outperforming drivers who had years more experience than her. She wasn't paid much in her earliest seasons, And by her own account, she had to prove herself in an industry that didn't always take her seriously at first. That didn't stop her. Over multiple seasons, 3 through 5, then 7 through 11, Kelly built a reputation for precision and calm under pressure that earned real respect from her fellow drivers, not just from the audience. She also had a business partnership with Darrell Ward, and after his death in 2016, she kept that company running rather than walking away, continuing to haul freight while managing the loss of a close friend and business partner. Unlike several names on this list, Kelly's story since the original series ended has been remarkably free of scandal or legal trouble. She's continued driving commercially, remains married, and in 2025 she returned for the show's 12th season alongside Todd Dewey, once again taking on the same frozen roads that made her famous more than a decade earlier. If anything, her longevity in an industry that's chewed up plenty of other careers says as much about her as any single season of television ever could. And finally, there's the driver most people associate with the entire franchise, Alex Debogorski. He's the only cast member to appear across all 11 original seasons, known for a mix of humor, patience, and hard-won instinct that came from decades of real trucking experience long before any camera crew showed up. Debogorski's approach was always about respecting the ice rather than fighting it, reading the sound and feel of the road under his tires rather than relying on bravado. Over the years, he's talked about surviving brutal conditions on the job, including being trapped for days in a snowbound truck during extreme cold. Since the original series wrapped, Debogorski has stayed publicly active, giving talks about trucking history, appearing at industry events, and releasing a memoir about his decades on the road. Unlike some of the names on this list, there's no arrest record, no fatal accident, no lawsuit attached to his name. Just a long career built on staying calm in conditions that would rattle almost anyone else. He's also continued to be associated with the franchise's most recent season, a fitting note for someone whose name has been tied to this show for longer than almost anyone else involved. Taken together, these 7 stories say something the show itself never fully captured. The ice roads were always the visible danger, the cracking ice, the blinding whiteouts, the loads too heavy for the lakes underneath them. But for several of these drivers, the real turning points in their lives happened nowhere near a frozen road at all, in a small plane over Montana, in a bathroom in Yellowknife, on a two-lane highway in Washington state, in the back seat of a producer's truck. Some of them never came back from what happened. Others walked straight back onto the ice like nothing could keep them away. If there's one thing this cast proves, it's that the danger these truckers signed up for was never just about the weather. If you want to see how this new season of Ice Road Truckers stacks up against the drivers who built this show's reputation in the first place, stick around, because there's a lot more to unpack about who's still out there and who never got the chance to come back.